I'm gonna go back because we didn't finish last week's lesson, and we're looking at the Bible and science on Wednesday night. So you will hear. Did you go to the museum today or tomorrow?
We're at the Creation Museum today.
And the Ark tomorrow. So you probably heard some of this today. My wife works for Answers in Genesis, and I worked there for 12 years. We know Ken very well, know most of the speakers. And so I have been taught this there. I was taught the Genesis flood in college, and then later I taught the Genesis flood in college. So you're going to hear a lot of this repeated, but hopefully for our people, some of it is new and some of it they've heard before. I want to go back. I did some extra reading today, and I want to go back and add a little bit about the source of all the water. We covered that, 2 weeks ago. Where did all the water come from? I gave the theory that I believe, and even after reading today, I still believe what I taught y'all. But if you get out and get around, there are some other theories. I believe, it's what I was always taught from the beginning. It's what I taught when I taught college. It's what I was taught when I worked at AIG. And it's what I still believe. But there are some other theories. And I based it on the fact that in the book of Genesis, God separated the waters from, see if y'all remember, above the firmament and the waters below the firmament. And we went into a lot of detail about the canopy and the effects that the canopy would have had upon the earth. It would have had a very high oxygen level, which would also contribute to the plants that I talked about. You know, they found palm leaves that are roughly 6 feet wide. That's a pretty good sized palm leaf. So, you know, there would have been an increase in oxygen. The mist that went up and watered the earth would have been consistent, not like flooding this week and, you know, dry next week. So I still hold to the canopy. But I did find out, some people think the canopy was made of ice, which would have kind of destroyed one of my points. Some think the canopy was actually the clouds in the air, and the canopy was simply made up of clouds. Others believe it was a vapor in the atmosphere. I still hold to liquid water, like water today. I've already covered number 2. Others hold that the water above the firmament would be the clouds. You know, clouds were much thicker and, you know, much heavier, obviously. They would take the position that the fountains of the great deep is where most of the water came from, rather than from the canopy that surrounded the earth. And that would account for the taking 150 days for the water to abate as the rain stopped, but the fountains of the deep kept bringing up water and bringing up water, and that would explain the 150 days. Now, I do want to make certain that you understand, and I should have done this much earlier, when we talk about different ideas, for example, different ideas about the canopy, or different ideas about some of the other things we looked at, we're not talking about Scripture. Everybody agrees there was a firmament. Everybody agrees there was water above the firmament. We may disagree on how much water. We may disagree on the form of the water, but there was water above and there was water beneath. And I say that because I was taught, well, I had already graduated, but I had an evangelist one time, the first church I pastored, and he was of the opinion that if we disagree on the interpretation of a verse, that we're saying you don't believe the Bible. No, we all believe the Bible. We just interpret the canopy a little bit different than others. I still hold to the canopy, even though I did read some of the other ideas. They did not persuade me yet. I had another point, and then I realized we'll get into that in chapter 5. So I took that point out, and we'll put it in chapter 5 when we deal with the animals aboard the ark. Some interesting ideas. How did he get a 75-foot T-Rex, or how did he get all of those on the ark? How did Noah get them all? How did he feed them all? We'll look at some of those things. Now, we left off last week. We had got just a little bit into capital B. And look at the earth today, and I really want to stress, when Noah came off of the ark and looked around at the face of the earth, there was nothing at all, nothing on the earth that would have even resembled what Noah had before the flood. And I mentioned Bill Gaither, who, are y'all, Southern Gospel, whatever Bill Gaither, y'all like his music? Or okay. I don't care for him and what he believes, but I do like a lot of his music. And he had an Alaskan cruise on TV, and I recorded it, still play it back. And by the way, help me convince my wife to take a cruise before we die. That's one of my final things that I want to do. But he was on this great big Alaskan cruise, and then they got off at one of the places there, and he was walking up, look at this beautiful stream flowing down, and think, this is what God created. And I screamed at the TV. I finally gave up after about 5 or 6 times. What we see today is nothing like what God created. The earth that God created was absolutely destroyed. It was, and I gave some points last week about the gigantic earthquakes, the earth shifting, the great big supercontinent ripping into individual continents, and the magnitude of that and all the results of that. And as the platelets, or the, not platelets, that's in your blood. Yes, thank you. As they crash together, it's going to cause tidal waves, hurricanes. It's going to cause massive floodwaters. And the earth literally, as Peter says, the earth that then was destroyed. There is nothing. That beautiful creek is actually after God's wrath. That's not what God created. That is a result of God's wrath. We have traveled, and I've seen some beautiful sights. The only place I want to go before I die, and haven't been yet, is the Grand Canyon. I've never been there. We've been everywhere else that I wanted to go. But the Grand Canyon, from what I've seen pictures, it's beautiful. Beautiful. Niagara Falls, we stood on the Canadian side. Beautiful, beautiful falls. But understand all of the beauty. I don't remember which mountain we were on, but stood on top of the mountain and could see for miles and miles of trees, and especially in the fall, the changing of beautiful, beautiful. But that's the result of the curse, the fall, the flood, not what God created. Today, if we look at the earth today, we see high mountain ranges. How did the mountains get here? I've already given you some pretty good clues. How did the mountains get here? What would happen, and I brought visuals last week, I didn't this week, but what happens, I don't want to do that, I'll break my water bottle. All right, you got 2 tectonic plates and they come crashing together, what's going to happen is they crash together. They're going to go up, right? You understand that? I had samples of the layers of the flood last week. But as two things crash together, some estimates are that they were moving 5 to 10 feet per second. That's moving it pretty good. The earth plates crash together. They're going to pop up and form, depending on how big and how hard and how fast, they're going to push up and form great mountain things. Deep Valley Gorges. We touched on the Grand Canyon a little bit last week, and that's where we left off. And I didn't get into this a lot. There are many, many books that I can get you if you want to read a lot about it. I mentioned, that's in 3. I'm getting ahead of myself. I mentioned the Grand Canyon. Evolutionists say that the Grand Canyon was formed by the Colorado River, used to be up even with the Grand Canyon, and then over years the Colorado River wore down until now it's just a little bitty river running down the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And if that were true, it would indeed take millions and millions and millions of years for that little bitty river to form that deep of a canyon. You know, and how deep is the Grand Canyon? I knew, but my brain is frozen. How deep is the Grand Canyon? Y'all are high school students. At this age, they know everything, don't they? Yes. Yeah. If I remember, and it's, my memory is not what it used to be, it's several miles deep in some places. So if it's going to dig down at the rate of erosion on today's level, it would take millions of years to dig a channel 2 miles deep, or about 2 miles deep. But if you had soft mud, like we described last week, the ground it's in layers, but it hasn't fully hardened yet. And then you've got all of this water coming from the flood as it begins to recede and go out toward the oceans. That much water is going to do a lot of wear and tear very fast. I mentioned the boulders that are folded 90 degrees. You can't do that with a rock that's hard. What happens if you try to bend a rock? I think you said it last week. It's going to break into a billion pieces. But if the rock is still soft, the dirt is still soft, and the floods come, it could bend a rock without any trouble at all, and then it could harden. But, and boy, I had the perfect figure for this one. Take a thing of water. How many of you water your flowers? My wife does. You don't water your flowers? You don't have flowers? I was going to say, we just gave you some Mother's Day. We give all of our ladies flowers on Mother's Day. But you take a bucket of water and you just drip, drip, drip water in. How much of the ground is it going to disturb? Not much at all. But if you take it and just dump it, or take a hose to it, and squirt it with a hose, what happens to that ground? That dirt, it's going to go everywhere. That's why Kathy doesn't let me water. So imagine the earth is still moist, and this great big torrential flood waters come rushing off of the mountains, rushing down to the ocean. It's going to carve a very big gully very, very quickly. Now, the Ice Age, and I just briefly mentioned this last week. Since we had an extra week on it, I thought I'd add a little bit. I was taught in school, in elementary and high school that the Ice Age was evidence of evolution. Were you ever, the Ice Age happened millions and millions of years ago, and the Ice Age is what did a lot of the damage. And out west, I've never seen it, but I've seen pictures. There are places where the earth is just flat. I mentioned when we lived in Texas, it was pretty flat. You could go outside and you could see a building 20, 30 miles away. It was that flat. So the Ice Age, I was taught, was millions and millions and millions of years ago. But I took a quote right out of Answers in Genesis website, and I believe this article was written, I believe, by Dr. Andrew Snelling, I think. The Ice Age was a period of several hundred years that began a short time after Noah's flood. During this time, global temperatures, remember I mentioned that the other day, all of these volcanoes, what do volcanoes produce? Cold air? Well, ash. But what comes out of a volcano? You think it's ice cubes, or do you think that may be a little warm? I think it might be a little warm. So you got all of this heat spewing up in the atmosphere, thousands and thousands of volcanoes spewing ash along with hot air, and it heats the atmosphere while the earth without the canopy is cooling down, and you've got this hot air with all of this moisture hitting the cold earth, producing snow. I like snow, but this would have been really, really, really thick snow. Did I ever show y'all the pictures from Brother Graber up in Michigan? Some of you were here when Brother Graber preached. Y'all weren't here yet. Anyway, he and I were very good friends. He pastored just over in Ohio. He preached here several times. And God moved him way up to the northeast corner of Michigan. He looks across the lake and sees Canada. That's how far up he is. He knows I love snow. I love snow. So his first winter up there, he sent me a picture and said, I know how much you like snow. You know where this is going. They had snow about 2 feet over the top of his car. He said, you want to move up here? And I said, not for that much. I mean, it was completely up over his car by about 2 or 3 feet. Picture the Ice Age with more snow and ice than that. It would have been, some estimate 50 to 100 feet. I don't know, but that's what some estimate. That freezes as the earth is cooled, the atmosphere is hot, the atmosphere has all of the ash, which seeds the rain comes down, freezes, as the earth is still adjusting. The temperature is still changing. There's a great climate change. And so the snow would melt back a little bit, and then it would come a cold front, more snow, it would melt back a little bit, and more snow. And some estimate that happened as much as 30 times, that it would, snow would come down really thick, it would melt a little bit, and as it melt, it would level out the earth, then more snow and more melting, and that's how much of the West, I'm told, got flat. By the way, I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to take a few extra. Don't worry about climate change today. The flood hasn't killed us. The after effects, the climate change after the flood hasn't killed us. So I don't think anything man can do is going to destroy the earth. There's a lot of reasons I think that. They told us when the wells out in the Gulf Coast, out in the Gulf, middle of the Gulf, those oil wells burst and spewed millions of gallons of oil. Oh, it's going to destroy the earth. Well, it did land on some beaches, but God somehow made a creature that eats oil, and those creatures ate most of the oil, and guess what? The earth didn't end. You know, the earth is still here. There is nothing we can do that's going to change the atmosphere, not even compared to what Noah went through. But here's Noah. He's used to this global climate, you know, some type of a tropical climate. And he comes out and he says, honey, where did you put the winter coats? Yeah, you got it. The rest of you will get it tomorrow sometime. I mean, think about it. They didn't have coats. They had to figure all of this out because the climate truly changed. The temperature, the canopy was gone. The ice, the ash would, you know, seed the clouds. And as I said, there was one ice age, but that one ice age went through several layers melting back. Now, it took a long time for the waters to recede. How many days are there in a year? I'm sorry? 365, except leap year. Y'all are all single, aren't you? You know what happens on leap year? The girls get to propose to the guys. Try it. Did you know that? Yeah. All right, back to the lesson. So we got these drastic climate changes. Now, 365 days minus 115 days, or 150 days. 365 minus 150 leaves. Thank you, sir. So the waters abated after 150 days. But it took another 215 days for the waters to drop enough that the ark could land on the top of one of the mountains. How long does it take water to evaporate? Let's say we have a flood. How long does it take the water to disappear? I won't say evaporate, to disappear. You have floods at your farm all the time. Okay. Where does that creek go? Okay. I'm asking for a reason, not just because I want to know. Today, when it floods, we've got creeks, and when it floods, it comes up almost to your house. We have creeks where the water just runs out. We have rivers where the water just runs out. But there are no creeks. There are no riverbeds. And so the water just has to slowly go down through either evaporation or once the ocean, it got down low enough, the oceans formed, then it could run out. But in the meantime, it doesn't have creeks to run into the Dry Fork Creek. South Fork, Dry Fork. It doesn't have that today. A flood can go through and be down, what'd you say, 15 minutes out of your front yard in 30 minutes? Yeah. But it didn't have all that before. So it took 215 days for the water to go down enough that the tops of the mountain were seen, and Noah landed on the top of the mountain. So it wasn't just the flood, it was the 215 days that it took for the waters to recede. All right, what would be another result of the flood? And I should have brought Buddy Davis's record out or tape out, CD out now. How many of you know who Buddy Davis is? Nobody. One, bless your heart. Do you like his music? I love his music. Yeah, I've been in his house, know him very well. But he's got a song. You want to sing it for us? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. Billions of dead things laid down by water all over the earth. That's what we find today. I know my singing's off. Do what? He wants you to sing it instead of me. Yeah. During the invitation, we send it out to our shut-ins. I got a call from one of our shut-ins one day because I would stand right by the microphone. And she texted me and said, would you please not stand in front of the microphone if you're going to sing during the invitation? Really, I mean, it's like, I don't sing during the invitation anymore. She really did say that. She really did. We find fossils, billions and billions of fossils laid down by water. So how do we get fish fossils on the top of the Alp Mountains? How do we find fossilized fish on the top of the mountain? Bird droppings. Normally I'm the comedian, Dave. I told you a couple of weeks ago, how are fossils formed? Rapid burial under a lot of pressure. Now, if it was just one fossil, we might say somebody threw it up there. There are millions of fossils on top of all of the mountain ranges, and they're formed by rapid burial under a lot of pressure. So what does that tell us about fossils on the top of the mountains? They're bashful tonight. Tells you that fish was up on the mountain, got buried under a lot of pressure, and fossilized. Have to be buried quick. So fish were swimming around up there. When the waters came, they got buried and fossilized. Now, the other thing, and I touched on this briefly, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight. We find caves. And I just said this last week. How many of you remember how caves were formed? How many of you have ever been in a cave? Oh, wow. Good, a lot of our people. Mammoth Cave, I suppose, is one of the biggest cave. I don't know, it's not just one cave, it's hundreds of caves. Been there many times. How did these caves form? Water. Good start. Remember how I said the Great Canyons were formed? Some rock would harden faster than others. So you got all of this water, you got all of these volcanoes, all of this mud, all of this other stuff that's spewing up, and then water would be trapped inside of it, and the water would flow out, and as the water flowed out, it would leave a hollow space where there was not the mud and things that filled in. That's a 15-second version. Now, I mentioned, how many of you know the difference between stalactites and stalagmites? How many of you know the difference? Yes, ma'am. Oh, I thought you knew. You're the senior. Oh, you're the senior. Boy, what kind of kids y'all teach down there? You know, the only way I can remember them is stalactites have a T, so they're from the top. Stalagmites have mud, they're on the bottom. That's how I keep them straight. tights or top, mites or mud bottom. Is that what you?
Stalactites with a C from the ceiling, stalagmites with a D from the ground.
Oh. All right. But he is the administrator. I mean, he's supposed to know something. Yeah. The administrator of our Christian school was administrator, but he was also in the Air Force. He retired not long ago as a general in the Air Force. So when he speaks, the kids listen. 10, hop! He retired as a general in the Air Force. But, and I know I'm out of time. How did the stalactites and the stalagmites form? If you go to one of the big caves today, and you go where there are stalactites and stalagmites, you'll notice there's a drop of water every so often. And at one drop every so often, to get those 10, 20-foot stalactites, one drop every few minutes would take millions and millions and millions of years to get that many drops of water. Same thing from the bottom. But what would happen instead of a drop, what would happen if you had stream, and these are underground where a lot of the minerals were. So instead of being plain water, these are super rich with minerals, and as the water dripped, it would evaporate. You could form a stalactite in a very, very short time. How long does it take to make a fossil? And I'm going to quit, I promise. How long does it take to make a fossil? Are fossils being formed today? No, I'm not talking about Dave. Are fossils being formed today? When I was working at Answers in Genesis, I forget, you may still carry the book, but there was a book, I think it may have been the Genesis Flood. It had a coal miner's helmet or hat, whatever it was, and somehow it got left in the cave. A few years later, and we're not talking millions of years, a few years later they went back, found it, and it was completely fossilized in just a short span of time. You don't need millions of years to form fossils. You need burial, pressure, and you can form a fossil in a very short time. What is a lady's favorite fossil? Or mineral, I should say. Diamonds are a girl's best friends. You know what diamonds are made of? Coal that was under a tremendous amount of pressure and formed, black coal formed into a clear diamond. Nowadays, we can make them in a lab. They say they cut glass just like a diamond does, but somehow I offered to buy my wife, what's that called? I didn't hear you, honey. Yes. You can buy a 5-carat one of those for a little of nothing. She would rather keep the real thing. I don't understand it, but that's how diamonds are formed. Coal compressed, and that's why they have to be, they don't come out, cut like that. They come out as a rock or something, and then they cut it down into whatever size. But we see that today. The reason we have diamonds are because of Noah's flood. The reason we have coal is because of Noah's flood. The reason we have oil is because of Noah's flood. So Noah's flood has a major role in the biblical history of the earth. All right.